Welcome, everyone. This is Latina Therapist. I am Jessica Medina, and today we have Larissa Treyes as a guest. Thank you so much for joining today.
Well, I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Of course. Well, Larissa, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I identify as an indigiqueer Latine. I
Okay.
am, go, my pronouns are she, they. I'm a first gen Ecuadorian American. So I'm very connected to my origins. Also, fun fact about myself is I have lived between the US and Ecuador throughout multiple periods of my life. So I feel like that has given me a deeper understanding of my culture, the idiosyncrasies, and also the strengths that we have as a community.
Tell me more. I am so intrigued already. What was that like? What experiences do you have because of that?
Yeah, so the first one, my sister and I moved to Ecuador. I was six, and she's 6 or 7. She's about 6 years older than me. So the biggest one for us, especially growing up in the Northeast, really close to New York, um, was being used to eating pizza with our hands.
Mm.
And then we would go to places and we would see people like at Pizza Hut or Domino's, anything like that, using utensils. Um, and I remember that being a bit of a shocker. The other part of it too, like the exposure to street vendors going by your neighborhood with like the loudspeakers.
Yes.
Um, And I don't know what your experience might be with this, but we moved to a barrio, and there were multiple restaurants that were based out of people's homes, where we
Oh,
had almuerzos, and that was also a big thing, the exposure to like what a complete lunch looks like, which is primero la sopa,
mhm.
yeah, especially with like 40 degrees Celsius heat. Um, then El Segundo, which there's a story of why it's called uh like because we call it Segundo. There were some English travelers at some point in Ecuador, and they would call it the second plate. So typically El Segundo se le llama seco, but it's because of
Oh,
second.
wow. Okay, I did not know
Yeah,
that.
I mean, and the exposure to fresh food, fruits, um, like fruit juice, freshly made, being part of lunch, like that was something that was really nice. The big shocker for sure was the the focus on people's appearance.
How so?
So even for like little things, something that I experienced in the Northeast was the very laid back way of people dressing or going to places, but there being a lot of judgment in like the way that you're dressed. um I feel like that was also I didn't know it back then, but um very deep classism and colorism for sure. um I think it wasn't until I moved down there that I recognized like the difference in my color and how I was treated differently because of that. Granted, we are in the middle of winter, hence I am my palest.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, like my connection to being trigueña and like the comments, also like the getting used to the comments of people of our appearance, the comparison between siblings. Uh, and I'm not
Hmm.
saying that like Latinos don't follow those traditions here.
Right.
Um, but I guess it was more apparent. I didn't recognize. I was like, huh, this is this is a little bit different. So there was definitely a lot of adjustment to do. Aside from also, I know we are in like a different time now where we don't really like they don't teach children's script anymore. But
Mm-hmm.
from my understanding, uh, the way that it used to be is, was it fifth grade where you start learning script here in the U.S.? Because I didn't do my
Like cursive, you
primary.
mean?
Yes,
Yeah, some like fourth grade, fifth grade. Mm-hmm.
where okay. So I go there, and I start second grade,
Mm.
and the kids already were doing cursive, so I had to get a tutor.
Oh my God, really?
Yes, I had to get a tutor because, like, I saw and I would try to replicate it, and I would start the letters in a different way. Difference also in colors of titles, like using red pen for titles.
Oh, interesting.
Mhm.
Was school encouraged over there?
What school?
Was school encouraged over there? Because I'm thinking about like where my parents are from,
Mm.
and they're like from this rancho, and so they're not even from a city, right? Like super small. And school was just never really encouraged there. So I was wondering if, where you were from, if school was encouraged.
So, both of my parents come from low income families.
Mm.
Uh, the difference would be that my dad came from a larger family, so it made resources more sparse. Um, my my mother had the privilege of having a smaller family, but also having a dad who was also self-taught and ended up being a professor at a university. Um, and through his own experiences, where he had access to wealth and then it was taken away from him,
Oh, wow.
stuff with like family. He, as always, and I know that this is very common in our culture of like saying, the education is the best investment, and at the end of the day, if you have physical means of wealth, those could be taken away from you, but what you have in your brain. Um, so I did grow up with two parents that were big on pushing, you have to study because that's going to give you greater opportunities. My mom studied dentistry in Ecuador. So there was always that, like, you got to push, um, because that's the only way. And as a child, you don't have a lot of obligations in the home,
Mm, mhm,
but
mhm.
your one job is school.
Yeah, I grew up that way too. But I think that was really drilled on me more by my dad and my mom. But I think it's because, they immigrated and they chose that, for a better life. And I think they understood that for me to have a better life than them, that it meant, getting a degree. I think he understood the value of a diploma. And it's something I think he even experienced at work. So my dad was self-taught. He was a mechanic, and he was very, very smart. And so he learned everything on his own. He could even figure out things that people with diplomas couldn't. But when it came to pay, the people with the diplomas would get more than him because he didn't have a diploma. He didn't have a degree.
Yeah, and I mean, and that's something that we do see so often.
Hmm.
Um, like years, I guess like 15 years at this point, you would always see even like an entry level job asking you for a bachelor's, even if they didn't even care what it was in. And I know it also talks about like the way that our system is set up, because if you have a 4-year degree, excuse me, on your resume, then what is that showing the employer? That you're able to show up on time, meet the deadlines,
Hmm.
and that you're goal motivated. So ultimately showing that you would be a good employee. Well, and especially with what we do, and I don't know, I know things have been changing recently in Ecuador, but you could have a 6-year well, yeah, 5 or 6 year degree with like your practicum and whatnot, but it's has a very similar structure of a bachelor's.
Interesting.
And you can call yourself a psychologist, not like here where you would have to go through a what is it, a PsyD in order to be able to call yourself that.
Yeah.
It's,
So at what age did you come back?
so yeah, I went there when I was 7, and then I came back around the time I was 12.
Hmm.
And then that obviously created a lot of challenges because I had been in a very different situation. And I also think of um, noticing positionality in these two different worlds. Uh, the fact that my parents had immigrated here
Mhm.
had provided them access to means that they also felt that when we went back, the fact that we both spoke English, that they couldn't let that die. So we had to go to private schools in Ecuador. Um, and not only private school, but a private school that had enough of their curriculum in English to ensure that we had that. Um, and of course, very privileged in that sense. And then coming back here, going to like the, I stayed here for about a year and like going to the public school system in the
Mhm.
highly like Latino area uh, in Hudson County, New Jersey, and then really seeing firsthand. I guess it had been like what my sister experienced the other way around, where she had to like level up with her classmates in high school. And for me, it was they were teaching math, and I was getting really bored. And I
Wow.
remember a classmate was like, "What do you like? How can you do this?" And I'm like, "I had seen that like so long ago." So clearly, the disparity was very apparent.
So it sounds like education in Ecuador is a lot more advanced than here sometimes. A lot of the times.
A lot of the times, and one of the parts, like, when it comes to math, my like, just like I had to take a tutor for, like, cursive, my sister had to take a uh, tutoring with math because algebra, like, the big book, Álgebra de Baldor,
Mhm.
I mean, that was never heard of here when we were living here until we go over there, and, like, in order to go through like a large portion of your secondary education, you have to know how to do that from front to end.
Wow. So, I've always lived in Texas. I didn't go back and forth. But you did. How did that impact your story and, feeling, Latin and your background? Like, how did that impact your identity?
I feel that that lack of stability, especially during obviously I recognize the language and the science behind it now, um, because I like to compare myself to an immigrant. Like if we think about like the generation of my parents, because then having to come back here at some point, and
Mhm.
even coming back after high school, because I did end up going back, so it was a couple of back and forth. um yes, there were a couple of advantages. The fact that I was born in this country, so from like an immigration status, I was regular,
Mhm.
regulated actually, and the handling of the language. However, there were a lot of things. Um, Even though I graduated in the top 5 of my class for high school, the fact that I didn't graduate in this country really made it difficult in regards to access. A lot of stuff are like state sponsored. So when it came to
Oh,
like getting a full
mhm.
ride and things
With
of
all
that
the
sort, like
benefits and stuff, the perks. Mm.
the perks and things of that sort, and so and the fact of like going being in one place but still feeling like there's another part missing, um definitely one of the things of being in both places throughout my life, uh I feel like it accentuated more the intersectionality,
Interesting.
because in a lot of cases, if we're first gen, sometimes we can connect more to like the culture of the states, and
Mhm.
then have our
Mm.
family from our country of origin, ay, que las gringuitas, that kind of stuff. Um, and especially the dictating of each side of what is it that we should be for a while. I think that was difficult for me, of
Yeah.
where do I fit in this, because in a lot of ways, and for simplicity, I'm going to use the term Americanized, of course, recognizing that it is inaccurate, because the Americas are a continent or group of continents, depending on how you want to see it. Um, but yeah, like the US side saying, like, oh, well, you don't really fit in with us because there's some ways where your mentality just doesn't like fit in the box, and then vice versa. Um,
Mhm.
I have always been very open and being vocal about certain things within my culture, whether we're talking about like the colorism, the justification of machismo and marianismo for the sake of religion. A lot of things in space, oh, well, that's just how we are. So it wasn't until I would say maybe like my mid 20s where, and also through a lot of therapy, recognizing that it was under my own terms.
Mm, mhm, mhm.
What parts and bits and pieces I wanted from each side, if we want to see it that way. And that it was not for anyone else to dictate whether I'm one or the other, but for me embracing the parts of me that are made by both sides.
Yeah, and, that's something very common. I feel like every first gen experiences that, but I'm thinking about your story of how difficult it must be to do it when you were living over there too. It's like it's not just, yeah, this is my background or this is parts of me because of my parents. Like you actually lived there multiple times. And so you probably felt that long term, like it wasn't something you could escape. And you felt it over there and you felt it over here. And I imagine that was very difficult.
Yeah, it was definitely very challenging. It called for a lot of character development.
Hmm.
Um, I recognize now that that's why connecting with peers was difficult, because I was able to see the world in from a bigger lens. Um, Especially the second time around where I finished my high school, not only did I go back to a different province, but a very small fisher town
Ah, wow. Okay.
that now is completely different and is very connected to like the modern world. But the first time around, I lived in Guayaquil, which is the second main city in Ecuador. So even that in itself was a clash.
I imagine. So you learned about colorism really, really early on.
Yes, I mean, one of the biggest things, and actually when I was younger, I always saw it as like a form of endearment,
Mm,
because I did notice that my parents were amongst the darkest of their siblings, but just as an observation, not in the way that colorism looks to separate us and
right.
like put us in
Superior.
this hierarchy.
Mhm.
Exactly. Um, that's the other thing too. I think in my deconstructing journey, it has helped me, because I remember in high school learning about that pyramid of even how like a Spaniard that was born in Spain had higher position than someone of Spaniard blood that was born in the Americas.
And this was in Ecuador?
Yeah, like when we learned about the conquest, like they have, it was a pyramid. It's similar to like the caste system that we've seen, like that exists in like other countries of the world. Um, but then I remember, like, I started hearing people like say stuff, or my mom share her experience um, of
Mm.
being the darkest, and how like her mom would say stuff, or her grandmother that looked nothing like us, extremely fair, blue eyes, blonde hair, and how she would get treated different over something that she couldn't necessarily change. Also, the ironic part of that is that part of the reason, not only because of mestizaje and our indigenous roots, is that great grandmother's husband was half black.
Oh my God.
So I picked up on certain things, like the pictures were in black and white, and it was trying to be hidden. Meanwhile, the
Interesting.
very curly hair, you can't erase that.
Yeah.
The thick nose, and also the women on that side of the family are very bottom heavy.
Mm.
And that's just something that if we look through evolution, um, like in regards to our phenotypes, it's very common in African roots.
I'm curious. So, like this is a very heavy topic, like colorism, and I think it impacts Latinos more than they know. And some are very aware, and I think some are not. And you see it in different forms, right? Like you see it like even within Latinos, like who's lighter and who's darker, the things that people say, but also the messaging, right? I've worked with people that had the messaging of you need to marry this white prince and give me very light skinned, blue eyed grandbabies. And the impact that has created in, people's journey of finding their person, of what, that person should or shouldn't look like. Um, it's I think a very hard and I think very impactful topic because you experience it so young. I'm curious about code switching and how that impacted that, just because that's another thing that I feel like we as first gens, um, and even minorities, Latinas, that we have to do sometimes. So I'm curious how that has impacted code switching for you.
So something that I guess also made it a little bit different, like added some nuance to it, is the
Hmm.
fact that since I did my high school years in Ecuador, I was, I guess, just practicing a lot of things like by the book per se.
Okay.
So I did recognize that when I came back, my accent was very neutral. For instance, we hear a lot of people say like, "Oh, that's my aunt,"
Mm.
but I say that's my aunt, and like little things. And it wasn't until like, I don't know, like 5 or 6 years in living in the Northeast that I noticed certain things pick, but they were very, very like subtle. In order to make it in this capitalist society, we got to move up in the world. And before becoming a therapist, I've had a number of jobs, customer service, delivering packages, uh, you know, like medical billing and all of those things. And the perception that I had, and obviously being a first gen, not really having someone to talk about what this
Mhm.
experience was, of like talking to a parent, because typically they wouldn't be allowed in these spaces because of their occupation. So automatically assuming, and I think I that's where I internalized a lot of the white body supremacy,
Mhm.
because in order for me to be perceived as professional, I have to be very white sounding.
What are the things that you internalized out of curiosity?
So specifically the form of speech, like the correct enunciation and
Mm.
uh, the
Like what
limited use of
professional is.
exactly like the limitation, because if we're authentically black and brown, then that's ghetto, that's unprofessional.
Mm.
And I did hold on to those beliefs for a long time. uh, I remember there was one time I was on the phone and my dad was close to me and he heard, uh, and he said something that still sticks with me. Well, if anyone heard you, they wouldn't even know that you're non-white. And the fact that he truly in his heart meant that as a compliment,
Mm, mhm.
because I'm sure that he has experience. I mean, his English, he's been in this country since he was 15, of like people treating you different and whatnot. So yes, I've held on to that a lot. And then moving further in the academic space, uh, feeling like I had to uphold that. But there's definitely been a switch for me in the past. I don't know. I would say the past 5, 6 years.
What has helped that switch, and what exactly was that switch?
I think the furthering of my healing, uh,
Mm.
the pride that comes from not only decolonizing but indigenizing myself and reconnecting to a lot of those parts of me and my ancestors that were forcefully washed away in order to make it in the world. Um, I definitely would have to say that coming to peace with the person that I am and finding beauty, not
Mm.
only in myself, um, but when I started perceiving those that didn't fall within this box of whiteness, and I was able to appreciate the beauty, I was like, something switched. I'm able to let go of that and recognize that, um, like if I step into a room, I'm I'm femme presenting, I'm brown,
Mm.
and there's not only no hiding it, but I also, most importantly, I don't want to hide it, and I'm really proud of where I come from. And in that process, I think also working as a therapist, being very open, like even in my Psychology Today profile and things of that sort, I talk about being neurospicy. I talk about being indigenous and being queer, and that relatability. That if
Mm.
I think,
Mhm.
and I recognize that that's also a level of privilege that you know, like earlier on in my career, being as vocal would have shut me down from being in a lot of spaces.
Yeah, definitely, but, I'm so glad that you're in this space to be able to be this vocal about it, not only for yourself, but those are, I think, maybe like identities and categories that a lot of Latinos struggle with and being vocal because of culture, because of religion or tradition, shame. And I bet it must be really nice, for someone to read your profile and say, oh my God, me too.
And I think one of the things it's always come across of like, oh, I I was attracted to your profile and wanted to set up a consultation because you seem very relatable. Um, and even when it comes to like the therapeutic space, I started. I remember one of my supervisors saying, "Well, like, come up with a list of maybe 4 or 5 points that you want to make sure that you hit." every single time during that intake session. And one of the things that I talk about is I don't want them to feel that there is this power dynamic where I'm the therapist and they're
Mhm.
down here and I know everything. Because at the end of the day, we're two human beings trying to do the best we can. I also provide self disclosure in the fact that I take care of my mental health. I go to therapy. I take medication. Um, and just the normalization of it all. At the same rate, if there's any questions that they have, to let me know. If there's anything that I say that makes them feel uncomfortable, I want them to feel comfortable enough to saying, "Hey, Larissa, here's the thing. You said this. I didn't like how it made me feel." And we process it. And the most important thing as well is reminding the clients that I am merely a guide,
Yep.
that they're the ones that do most of the work. Of course, I have knowledge. And the biggest thing, actually, the second biggest thing is um, I have a DSM in my office. I tell them that, we live in a system where we need to provide diagnosis for insurance purposes and whatnot. I I invite them to not get hung up on the diagnosis itself, and I remind them that the DSM in some ways can be a very helpful tool, but ultimately it was developed by cis het white middle-aged men that have basically pathologized a lot of things. We think about homosexuality being part of it. It wasn't removed until the 1970s. It sounds like a long time, but it wasn't that long ago. And a lot of us therapists that work with gender nonconforming folks and trans folks, uh, when we have to provide documentation for gender reaffirming surgery, where we're talking about hysterectomies, top or bottom surgery, we end up having to use gender dysphoria disorder and
Mm,
proving that our clients are broken in order for it to be necessary. And granted, yes, we can think about that. There's a means to an end. But I always try to take the opportunity to process that with my client of some of the things that the letters might include and where we both stand when it comes to it to make sure that we're on the same page. Because I would never want my client to feel like, well, we were having a certain conversation during our sessions, but then the letter shows something different.
the words that are coming to my mind is I think autonomy and respect and just having the space to be themselves. And that's the modality I was taught in grad school of that is really important. But as you know, I continue being on the field, it started becoming even more important as a Latina because I was just realizing how many first gens, how many Latinos don't feel like they can be themselves. Like they have to like maybe whitewash themselves or they have to make themselves fit in or make themselves be good enough or and even with people that are very successful, that still feeling of it's not enough, like I'm still viewed this way, people still see me this way, I still get these looks. And it's one of the things where I think treating clients like that of respecting their autonomy, I think on a cultural level, it's also a reminder to them that you can be yourselves and it's okay. And you should be yourself.
Yeah, and I think you said something very, very on point with being first gen and like the feeling that somehow we're not doing enough and we need to keep
Hmm.
pushing forward. So like the productivity connected to our worth, um, the romanticizing and normalization in a country like this of hustle culture. And it's like, well, I'm doing all these things. What are you? Um, and the fact that it can be very damaging. And
Yeah.
we can see it sometimes in a lot of our family members working themselves to the bone, not only to support their families here, but to support their families back home. And then like I've seen it around a lot of their their biological age not necessarily matching the way that their body not only looks but how they feel, because the burnout is so intense. And I also think that there's something big with being not only first gen, but first gen of also a millennial. There are a lot of things that we went through, even of, and I'm really glad, even the way that when you introduced me, like you said Larissa Treyes, but for the longest, like I felt that I'm Larissa Treyes if I'm speaking Spanish, but if I'm speaking English, then I'm Larissa Trellis because that's going to make it easier for you not only to understand my
Mm.
name, but to spell it accurately. Um, and again, like really like fragmenting parts of my identity, like they're two different things.
Yeah, I think goes back to the identity and even the code switching, right? Like even the name, it is the way you say it, the way you pronounce it, it is a form of code switching. Which is crazy if you think about it. Even me, like I'm Jessica, but I know people that speak Spanish and that's their primary name is Jessica, which is fine, right? But yeah, it's crazy how like even our names, um, it's something that we have to think about, and not everyone does. Not
Yeah, and the fact of like even that the trigger word per se of the moment that you're not saying Larissa, but you're saying Larissa, how that's sending the message of like we need to behave in XYZ way.
Yeah, and how it changes with environments. Like if
Mm-hmm.
you're here, I'm sure you're Larissa, but if you're over there, I'm sure you're Larissa.
Yeah. And actually it wasn't I reconnected with one of my high school friends from Ecuador. Um, and she was like, I have a question. And I hope you don't take it the wrong way, but like I know you're down with the people and the culture and everything, but I've noticed that in your like English videos you say it this way. And I was like, actually that's a great question, and a lot of it comes from of the way that we the whitewashing, and that even though there's a lot of deconstructing that I've done and that I continue to do, there are other parts, that still hold up. Um, and the becoming comfortable with others having to do the work of, well, figure out, try to pronounce my name.
Yeah, that's a good point. Exactly. I think really to that point too is some of this code switching is so automatic. And I think it's definitely a survival skill, that I think just comes, and there's a lot of studies and of little kids doing it. Like no one teaches you how to code switch, but you just know how to do it.
Yeah.
And I think some more than others, but I think just picking up on cues of, okay, I need to do this.
Yeah. And the fact of like, because we do it so often and having to adapt and it being as a form of survival, not only the explicit but the implicit ways that we've identified, but that others around us of, well, you need to do this in order to be perceived in a certain way in your environment. And that's why this process of reconnecting to our roots and having the autonomy to define who we want to be as an individual is an ongoing process. Um,
For sure.
and lastly, I would have to say that I I can't promote myself as a therapist that is radical and
Mm.
decolonizes and that questions white body supremacy and where all of these beliefs and others, if I am not constantly doing it within my personal life, um, I can't talk the talk and not walk the walk.
Right,
It just
right.
doesn't. And especially as you know, in the therapeutic space, authenticity, that's just something we can't fake. We either have it or we don't.
Yeah, yep, exactly. I think you bring up a really good point because, we always talk about, like, us first gens, finding yourself, who you are, your identity, finding a place in both sides. But what you're talking about a lot today is deconstructing as well. Like, not only finding, but deconstructing everything you have learned that maybe in America or from white supremacy, white people, like the privileged race of deconstructing that and how that does impact our personal lives, professional lives. And I think that that's a really great and interesting take because we do it with our clients, right? Like we deconstruct all the time, but talking about that more, like let's deconstruct, what we've learned.
Yeah. I mean, that the other part of that too is that, you know, there's in the code switching and the whitewashing ourselves, there's there's so much that we shave of ourselves. There's so much sabor that gets left behind.
Mm.
And it's why because we don't want attention, because we just want to pass and want to be accepted. And recognizing that in that very small and narrow box of whiteness, sometimes not even white people fit. So part of that is as much as we push our clients to show up authentically, it's the same thing with us. Not being fearful of taking space, of showing up authentically, whether it's being colorful in the way we self express and we dress, we speak, and reclaiming a lot of our identities. We've seen it for so long, when we thought about like the hoops and the long acrylics, that was like, well, you don't really do that in the professional space. And then, um, white women, very prominent in the influencer world, started doing that. And then all of a sudden it was, well, now they've given us permission to do so. And I think the
Mhm.
moment where we reclaim that we can show up reclaiming to parts of our identity. And sometimes it's not even from our own country, but growing up in a country like this, we're exposed to foods from other countries and have best friends and become parts of their family. Um, and that's part of why, of like my Latinidad, that yes, I recognize I'm very Ecuadorian in a lot of ways. Um, but I'm just proud of being Latin American.
I love that. I love that you got to that place of being proud and saying it out loud.
Yeah. And, like, I also recognize the responsibility that I hold for the next generation. Um, I am in a mixed race marriage,
Mm,
and it's highly likely that some of my children will be white passing,
mm.
or that one will and one won't. We've seen how genetics works, especially within our community, and that's why I always reference, like, Encanto. I'm like, "You see that? That's what a lot of our families look like, different hair color textures, different skin colors, different eye colors, and because we're not a monolith. Um, and how will I teach my future children to be proud of where they come from?
And who they are.
And exactly, and who they are. And it's like, you know, you enjoy the food, and that's a big thing, like the food, how we are connected to our culture, how we connect to other cultures, and they explain to you the reasons why they cook certain food a certain way, and that's part of why I am so thankful of having been able to live a large part of my life in this country. Like I don't take it for granted in the times where I have lived or have access to more racially diverse areas. to go and have some pupusas, have some arepas,
Mhm.
whatever the case might be, to be able to enjoy that. And, it might not be particularly mine because my family didn't grow up there, but it makes me feel like I'm going to a primo or a prima's house.
And admire, right, and respect. Mhm.
Hmm. Yeah, like it's truly beautiful, and I think through the work that you do and creating visibility for professionals like us, um, is very important because we witnessed it even growing up through TV, not seeing characters that look like us. And then it's saying, am I dreaming too big of wanting to become XYZ?
Yeah.
But we are here and we're here to stay.
Exactly, and I think also talking about this stuff, right? Like, this is stuff that I think other generations didn't talk about, and we're giving exposure to.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, and we see it. The newer generations have no qualms of showing up authentically, of being more knowledgeable about their sexual orientation, their gender identity, their mental health diagnosis. They have a lot of words. They have the language to figure themselves out, and that accelerates that self knowledge journey, and it's really wonderful to see.
Well, I think what a great talk today. Any last messaging out there that you would like to share with the audience today?
I would definitely say pushing for what you believe in, um, and recognizing that yes, there are certain moves we have to make to move up in this structured world, and that doesn't, we can still be aware of systematic racism and how that blocks a lot of us from opportunities and whatnot. But if you have found yourself or you're on your way to a place of privilege, um,
Mm,
using that level of privilege, because sometimes we either have to work hard for it or we just get it based on how we were born or where we were born.
yep.
But regardless, if you have achieved, earned, or just been given that privilege, ask yourself, what are you doing with that privilege to help others in marginalized communities? Are you using your voice to empower them?
And also that they don't have to compromise themselves to get up there.
Exactly. And
Mhm.
that's beautiful because I feel growing up we've always heard about, well, if you're in a position of power, there's certain rules that you have to go by and certain ideas that you have to let go of.
Yeah, yeah. Like, for Latinos to go up the ladder, they don't have to be whitewashed.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for today's talk. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much. How can people contact you if they wanted to chat with you some more, or, ask about your therapy services?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. Like it really means a lot. I have been following the page for a while, the representation. I know before we started recording, I was talking about that. Um, I am currently located in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, so that's all the way down. I have my socials are mindful psychotherapeutics for Instagram, and then for TikTok, it's only mindful psychotherapeutic because of not being allowed as many characters. So I also have a link tree if anyone happens to be located in the area. Um, we're also looking forward to in the counseling association. I know that sometime this year we'll be able to apply for compact, which I'm really excited about because again, it gives people like us major visibility and accessibility to people that, I don't know, a Latino that's in the middle of, I don't know, Nebraska,
Yep. Hmm.
and somehow finds that they can't really connect, or that they've tried therapy and they can't connect because they know it through the books and cultural humility, but living it and understanding the nuances of it. And that's why we need to continue showing up and servicing our communities and just taking up space.
Of course, yes. I tell that clients all the time, like, take up space, please.
Yeah, it will eliminate the people that shouldn't be part of your journey, and it will definitely attract those that want to see you shine and that are inspired by you, and that's priceless.
I love it. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciated you today. And thank you, everyone, for watching. Thank you for tuning in. And then I will see y'all next time.
Bye.